In this video, we will see binding value converters. Data bindings usually transfer data from a source property to a target property. When implicit data conversion is not possible, we will have to use binding value converters. In the following demo, we will see value converters and how they are used in the data binding. Binding value converters are used when the source and target properties are of different data types, and some kind of conversion is required. Let us add a label and a slider control is shown. Now add another label to display the slider value. The text value of this label is bound to the value property of the slider control, named red. We want to convert the floating point value returned by the slider control to an integer value. Create a folder named Converter in the root. Add a class FloatToIntConverter derived from IValueConverter in the newly created folder. Implement the interface functions. In the convert function, we will cast the value to an integer. Now we will have to create an instance of this converter object within our XAML file. We will add the namespace to the top of the XAML file. And add an instance of the float to integer converter within the content page resources block. We can set an instance of this converter to the converter property of the binding class or to the converter property of the binding markup extension. This class becomes part of the data binding. Let us build and run the application. The converter object is converting the float value to an integer value. Now change the label control to a text box and run the application. Now there is an error while running the application. The default binding mode property of a text box control is two-way. Data goes both ways between the source and the target. If we want the data to flow from the target to the source, we will have to implement the ConvertBack function of the IValueConverter class. Now we see the ConvertBack function in effect. The value in the text box is reflected in the slider control. Now copy the three controls and paste them to create new three sets of controls. and label them as green as shown in the code. Repeat them for blue. Running the application will show the three slider controls labeled red, green, and blue, along with the text box controls. Let us add a label, sum, and a text box control to display the sum of the values displayed in the top three text box controls. We will be using data binding to populate this text box control. Add a new class called TotalValueConverter, derived from IMultiValueConverter. Now implement the convert and ConvertBack functions of IMultiValueConverter Interface. Remove the unused using statements. Add an instance of TotalValueConverter in the Content Page Resources section. Now refer the multi-value-converter object to pass the numeric values from the red, green, and blue text boxes. The converter will return the sum of the three numbers and render it within the text box control. The RGB converter will call color from RGB function to return a color object. Add an instance of the RGB converter to the resources dictionary. Add a stack layout as the fifth row in the grid. Set the background color property of this newly added stack layout, using RGBMultiValueConverter class object. By changing the red, green, and blue slider control values, the background color of the stack layout changes dynamically. Value converter classes can have properties and generic parameters. We will add a IValueConverter that converts a bool from source to an object of type T for the target. The convert function will return the true object if passed true, and it will return the false object if passed a false value. Add a stack layout and add a label, switch control, and another label. Display yes, and when it is off we will display a no. Here the return type is of string. For the text color we will bind the text color property by using BoolToObjectConverter and passing a color object. Now add a label and entry control as shown. We will use this to demonstrate another two variations of the generic value converter. We will bind the visibility property of the newly added stack layout to the pending payments switch and pass in a Boolean value to hide or show the stack layout. Now we will bind the style property to the pending payment switch control and dynamically change the style object.